Absolutely.
What steps have you considered taking in terms of creating a safer and more inclusive space for people, BIPOC people coming to your parks?
We've talked about, I mean, it really depends on the park. Those that are sort of more on the edge of communities, we've talked about having like call boxes, in the parks. We've talked about making changes to the interpretive signage. So it's more accessible and welcoming and less about, I mean, some of our parks, frankly, we talk a lot about the history, but it's mostly about the history of, white men from the 19th century, and their role there. So really trying to reinterpret, and talk about land acknowledgement, who were the indigenous peoples who were on these lands. I mean, these are things that land trusts, including Scenic Hudson, had not focused on for decades, but we're trying to change that. We've talked about coming up with kind of a land acknowledgement statement so that when you arrive at one of our parks, it says this is land of formerly, or maybe even currently in the territory of the Lenape or what have you. And we actually did work, one of our parks in Greene County, we worked with the Stockbridge Munsee tribe to create interpretive signage that tells the history of their role on the land. So these are all, so there's both education, and then there's welcoming, and then there's making places feel safer. And the safety is probably the hardest one of those, because we can't have a park ranger in every park. Our parks are largely unstaffed, but more regular patrols by our park staff is part of it. So there's lots of things we can do, but the safety is probably the hardest place. I think we focus more on hopefully we can do more to just change people's attitudes than about sort of, hard infrastructure solutions, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So I think of sustainability as addressing three pillars, being environment, economy, and equity, social equity. I understand the ways that land trusts serve environmental and economic interests, but what other ways do you serve equity?
Other ways than what?
Other ways, I feel like you have, elaborated on, the ongoing conversation about trying to be more inclusive, like with the signage in parks,
yeah.
And also considering, the spaces like in the urban areas that you've designated for BIPOC people.
Yeah, I think there's various things. We rely a lot on Student Conservation Association interns. Every year we get like 4 of these interns. They work with us for 10 months and they do a lot of work in our parks. They do environmental education and community engagement. And they're incredible people, and they make not much money. It's really not a living wage. They're considered volunteers who get a stipend. And so what has happened is that a lot of the candidates we get are, they're young people whose parents can support them financially so they can do this. So they get their stipend, but they're getting other supports. We're working on a plan. President Biden has this proposal for a climate conservation corps that'll be like, like in the Depression, when we put a lot of people to work, putting people to work in service of helping the nation address climate change. We'd like to utilize, and the Student Conservation Association is going to be part of that. We'd like to help that by increasing the pay of this group so that we can attract more BIPOC people, young people, as kind of career starters to get involved in conservation by paying them a living wage, so that we're not just attracting upper middle class white people whose parents can help them, take this on. So that's a very tangible thing that we're trying to do. We take very seriously hiring for, to increase the diversity of our staff. 5 years ago, well, I say we've made a lot of progress in the last 5 years in hiring people of color into professional positions. I think we'll continue to keep doing that. We've kind of learned about where we should be focusing our recruitment efforts in terms of schools and other organizations that have networks, rather than just sort of putting things out on a job board and hoping for the best. We're trying to be more proactive in our hiring recruitment for positions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so my last question is basically, and you've basically touched on this throughout the interview, but what do you think of the prospect of land conservation mobilizing to allocate land to BIPOC farmers?
I think there's real potential. I personally take it seriously, and I want us to focus on it. I think we can do it. I think there's a real tangible prospect of doing that. Where I think we're challenged is, engaging with the right group that's ready to work with us. We've had some conversations with Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, which is like 3 people. It's 3 people running an organization across like 7 states or something. So, just finding the way for all of us to devote the time necessary to hammering out those agreements and structuring, agreements for land access is going to be the biggest challenge. I think
What do you think is the most important part of that agreement? Because I remember you saying that, it doesn't just come down to, here's a price and you pay us for the price, but you wanted to be more creative about it. And, being that BIPOC farmers have historically been disadvantaged, disenfranchised even, how do we become creative in terms of crafting those agreements? Like, what do you think would be the most important part in weighing in whether it's a decision that you would want to make in terms of advocating the land?
That's a really great question. I think I'd like to take it out of the realm of like a financial transaction. So maybe we're making this land available for free, but maybe, we also want to make sure that we're giving these farmers the best chance for success. And any agreement like this, any agreement about land, you have to deal with like, what are the what ifs here? What's the worst case scenario? What if it doesn't work? What if they are not successful in farming this land? So we have to figure out ways that we can adjust and adapt. And so maybe it's, a relatively short-term agreement that's a confidence building measure for all of us, followed by a longer term, extension. Maybe it's, a commitment to helping the farmer that we bring onto the land with grants and things like that.
Do you mean before, like prior to conveying ownership?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a long-term, maybe it's a medium-term lease followed by a long-term lease followed by conveyance of fee title. If if the property is used for farming, over that period. I don't know. I mean, this is all kind of, just ideas. I think it's probably more likely that we'll enter into it through a series of steps like that, rather than just saying we're going to give title to this land. I think there's probably confidence building measures on both sides that have to happen, and sort of establish trust on all sides, and through the land, and devise a clear pathway to get there. I'd like to do more research on that. So in fact, if you in your in your research, Olivia, if you come up with other groups that are, you know, further along in their thinking about this, I would really love to read about that.
Of course, I promise to share that with you.
Great.
And I'm just very grateful that, you know, you took the time to meet with me and to discuss this very important topic.
Absolutely.
And let's continue to share.
Yeah, well, you asked some great questions, and I hope I've answered them.